Let him sleep on the couch.
5 words said by my son's wife in the house I paid for split something inside me I thought was unbreakable. They weren't just about a bed, they were a verdict on my worth, a quiet plan to shrink my name on paper until it could be signed away without me. That night I learned the humiliation wasn't an accident, it was strategy. Papers renamed as insurance, a doctor ready to stamp incapacity, a smear to make the lie feel true. I didn't shout, I took notes, I gathered proof, and I chose the one form of revenge that leaves no stains, standing so straight for so long that every scheme has to bow to pass. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back. Be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate most. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. I am Ethan Callum, 68 and more comfortable with a hand plane than a smartphone, a retired union carpenter who keeps a bench in my Portland garage so my hands don't forget what honesty feels like. This week I spent what I'd saved, $4,200, on a beach house at Cannon Beach, a gift meant to tug my family back toward the same table. I pictured long breakfasts, easy jokes, and the plain privilege of being part of my son's life. The house breathed like the shoreline. Salt air veiled the windows, the patio door sighed when wind pressed the glass, and the ceiling fan in the living room ticked like a metronome. I set the printed reservation with my name bold across the top on the quartz counter, my card's last 4 digits circled. It felt like planting a small flag. I paid for this. Lucas, my son, shouldered a cooler and vanished into a work call before we finished stacking luggage. "Email just came in, give me a minute," he said, already half a room away. His kids, Owen and Avery, sprinted upstairs to claim the attic room they had campaigned for. I followed with groceries, listening past the bustle. Harper moved like a foreman. Phone in her palm, she opened an app that mapped the rooms like a seating chart. Her mother, Vivian, drifted through the master, admiring the freestanding tub that framed an oval of sea. "This tub is heavenly," she said. "Let him sleep on the couch," Harper added, flat as a memo. Not cruel, just efficient. The pronoun clipped me smaller than my name. It said guest when the bill said host. I looked at the couch. Dark leather, long enough if I didn't mind the armrest at my shoulder. The fan ticked, the ocean hushed, my mouth stayed shut. First days are hinges. Force them and the door swings wrong for a week. Vivian rolled her suitcase into the master and laughed like someone who had won a raffle. Lucas poked out of the second bedroom long enough to say, "Dad, just relax. I've got it." Then the door closed on the glow of his screen. Usefulness steadies me. I lined coffee cups, set the maker, tucked groceries into unfamiliar cabinets, and reminded myself this was a gift, not a test. "Dinner at 7, team," Harper called, wiping the patio table with quick, competent circles. Vivian sorted towels until a coral stack won the title of more coastal. Owen brought me a chipped shell and asked, "This shell's lucky, right?" "Lucky enough," I said. Avery asked, "Does the attic creak, Grandpa?" "Only when it's telling stories," I told her. We ate shrimp and salad at the long table while a silver seam of water darkened beyond the glass. I began a story about framing a roof in Bend during a March storm, how we braced trusses with rope and stubbornness. Owen leaned closer. Harper cut in to remind the kids about sunscreen and lights out. My story folded and slid back into my pocket. After dishes, I walked the house the way a carpenter inspects a job site, quietly, noticing. The master door stood ajar, the tub held the last pink of sunset like a polished shell. The second bedroom smelled of a new candle. Upstairs, the attic hummed with conspiratorial whispers. In the living room, the couch waited under the slow fan, a throw blanket folded like a fresh bandage. I made the couch into something that pretended to be a bed, spare pillow from a closet, thin cotton blanket, my jacket across my feet because Pacific nights find your bones. The frame's ribs introduced themselves through the cushions when I lay down. Through the glass, the dark sea breathed in long sentences. In the master, water ran. Vivian laughed at something too soft for words. Respect has many currencies. Tonight it was a door that locked for some and a blanket that slid for others. I could have said a dozen true things. I could have held up the invoice with my name and asked what it bought besides a view. But anger on the first night is a solvent that strips finish and leaves everything raw. I want my grandchildren to remember the ocean, not a man raising his voice to be accounted for. So I swallowed the small insult and let it sit like a coal. Before sleep, I stood at the glass and watched fog bow over Haystack Rock like a curtain. Inside, the new arrangement settled around me. Tomorrow, I told myself, would start from breakfast the way good days do. We would pass the syrup and the talking would find me. Still, a splinter remained. I couldn't name it, only taste it. Roles assigned as if by app, my son's life, keeping a screen between us. I closed my eyes to the tick of the fan and the hush of the Pacific and promised to pay attention. Morning writes in clearer lines. I didn't know the words yet, only the dry edge of salt in the air, a papery hint of forms waiting to be filled. Morning seeped into the house like steam off the tide, soft and salt bitter, the kind that climbs your lungs before your eyes fully unstick. I stood in the kitchen with a mug warming both hands and watched the patio door fog at the edges where cold glass met room air. The ceiling fan kept its patient tick. Beyond the rail, fog hung over Haystack Rock as if someone had pulled a gray sheet across it. A gull rasped. The house had the hush of people not yet awake to their roles. Harper's voice carried from the deck, threaded by wind and the tin rattle of the flag clip. I didn't mean to listen. The ocean was louder than she was, and yet certain syllables cut through clean the way a nail gun crack travels down a street. Paperwork, she said, then assets, then evaluation, as if she were laying boards on sawhorses. A pause, the faint hum of speakerphone. If we get his signature this week, she said, Dr. Malcolm Reese will have the report ready. I didn't move. Steam lifted off my coffee like a weather map in miniature. The words arranged themselves without my help. In my trade, I learned to read grain the way it telegraphs a split waiting to happen. These words had grain I recognized. Evaluation meant capacity. Capacity meant whether a man is judged fit to choose. Assets meant not seashells and photo albums, but accounts and deeds. I felt the back of my neck go cool. I thought about the way she had joked lately, how I forget things, how I leave the burner on, how I mix up pills. Jokes work like primer. Thin coat, even strokes. Then paint goes on easy. I sipped and remembered how I end my nights the same way I always have. Oven off, knob straight, meds sorted into a cheap plastic tray that snaps like a tackle box. Tools on their hooks, 16th marks on the bench, knife clean. If there is a thing I have left, it's sequence. Every job I ever finished stood because someone honored sequence. Vivian floated in wearing a robe the color of a toothpaste commercial and clapped once to wake the room. She took the mug I had set for her and, with the kind authority of someone who has practiced, announced the week, tide pools Tuesday, gallery walk Wednesday, seafood on Thursday, and her voice smoothed here, Friday evening, we would sign a few health insurance forms for Dad so it's all less of a hassle later. She smiled at me the way people smile at a polite stranger. The word later lingered like perfume that didn't suit the wearer. Lucas slid into a chair, phone face down, but never far. He nodded along as if she were reading a forecast, not setting a compass. I wanted him to look at me the way he did when he was small and trying to understand a level bubble, how it moves left and right until it floats center. Instead, I saw a man grateful to outsource friction. He said, "Sounds good," which is modern for "don't make me be the wall." I set plates, wiped a ring of coffee my own cup had left, and wrote 3 words in the pocket notebook I keep for lumber lists and small embarrassments: forms, insurance, sign. The printed reservation still sat where I had left it, my name heavy and bold, as if a contract could argue reputation into being. It looked theatrical there beside the ceramic fruit bowl. I slid it underneath to quiet its shine. The day put on normal clothes. Owen and Avery tumbled down, hair electric, asking for pancakes. I watched batter bloom bubbles in the skillet while Harper checked her watch, the kind of compulsive glance people call productivity. Vivian phoned a restaurant and said the phrase "party of six" twice. Lucas stepped out to take a call and came back with a face that had learned to be neutral. I asked him whether the kids wanted to see the tide chart later, and he said they'd love that without checking if they would. We walked the beach after lunch, the way tourists do, shoulders lifted, hands crammed in pockets against the damp. I showed Owen how you can find tiny crabs under stones if you flip and leave them exactly as found. Avery collected agates with the fierce seriousness children bring to treasure. For a while the day behaved. The couch was only a couch. The master was only a room with a tub. The wind made everybody's eyes water, so nobody asked who of us had been crying. That evening, dishes clicked into cupboards and the adults drifted toward screens. The ocean darkened from nickel to slate. I wiped the counter and turned off the under-cabinet lights so the room could hold one kind of glow. Then a phone buzzed against the quartz, a little insect whir. I glanced once because you do when a noise insists. The preview line flashed and froze as if hand-lettered for the slowest reader: capacity report, durable power, guardianship recommendation. The sender was Dr. Malcolm Reese. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't even move my mug. I stood very still while something slid into place, quiet as a pocket door. This was not about convenience or clarity or preventing an errand later. This had weight, signatures, witnesses, a notary stamp like a brand. Guardianship belongs to children and the incapacitated. The only time in my life I carried that word was when I signed for Lucas after his mother died, and the world suddenly asked me for papers to prove I was what I already was. I rinsed my cup and let water run a second too long. Out on the deck, the foghorn lowed, a mournful syllable that kept its own counsel. I thought about escalation and restraint, about how many fights start at the wrong time and make every right time after that smaller. I thought about breakfast tomorrow, the way butter looks when it is spread without tearing bread. So I made a plan that wasn't a plan so much as a posture. Watch. Write down exactly what is said and when. Let people choose the words they want attached to their names. Find out who Dr. Reese is, not by rumor but by record. Keep my hands steady and my voice plain. Lend nothing that I cannot afford to lose, not money, not authority, not the shape of my name on paper. I stood by the sliding door again and looked at the glass. My breath fogged a small oval that cleared slowly. Past my faint reflection, the sea kept doing its work, dragging and returning, patient as an old man cleaning a tool. Morning would write in clearer lines. I could feel that promise under my ribs. Somewhere ahead, a folder would fall open. Somewhere a word would reveal what it had been smuggling. I finished the last of the coffee cold, tasted the salt on my own lip, and let the fan tick mark the beats until the house went quiet enough to hear what it was telling me. The house had emptied into the day, sand buckets clattering down the path, the door thumping shut, the hum of a car that shouldn't have needed to go anywhere. I lingered, pretending I'd forgotten sunscreen, giving myself the quiet I needed. The fan marked the seconds. Shore wind slipped through the slider and tugged the curtains like a nervous hand. Somewhere a gull argued with a trash can. I crossed the living room to fetch my jacket from the back of a chair, and that's when the tote spilled its secret. A manila folder lay angled under the table leg, its tab kissed with a smear of coral lipstick. I knew the tote. Harper never went anywhere without it. I crouched and slid the folder free, then let myself breathe once before I opened it. The first page was a cover sheet crisp enough to cut my thumb. Durable power of attorney, it read, in the kind of font lawyers use to make certainty look inevitable. Principal, Ethan Callum. Agent, Lucas Callum. Attached, evaluation by Dr. Malcolm Reese. There was a sticky note like a flag in the corner. Sign Friday. Witness, Vivian plus property manager. The handwriting leaned forward, hungry. I read the body the way I read framing diagrams, slowly, line by line, until the grain revealed itself. The agent shall have authority to manage bank accounts, real property located at Northeast Alberta Street, Oregon, and to consent to placement in long-term care upon recommendation of a licensed physician. A clause slid by, bland as a smile. If the principal is deemed to lack capacity as defined by the evaluation attached. Capacity was a word with a trapdoor in it. Step wrong and you disappear. The carpenter in me clocked details, date in the footer, page numbers, blank lines waiting for names, and the tidy box where a notary would later prove I had agreed to vanish. I took photos with my old phone, one per page, then close-ups of phrases that changed a life in 6 words. Consent to placement, durable power, guardianship recommendation. I made sure to capture the sticky note with its giddy little schedule. Then I returned every sheet to the order I had found it, slid the folder back under the tote, nudged the tote so its strap hung as it had before. When you've repaired enough broken cabinets, you learn not to leave bright fingerprints. There was a sticky note like a flag in the corner, signed Friday. Witness, Vivian plus property manager. The handwriting leaned forward, hungry. I read the body the way I read framing diagrams, slowly, line by line, until the grain revealed itself. The agent shall have authority to manage bank accounts, real property located at Northeast Alberta Street, Oregon, and to consent to placement in long-term care upon recommendation of a licensed physician. A clause slid by, bland as a smile. If the principal is deemed to lack capacity as defined by the evaluation attached. Capacity was a word with a trapdoor in it. Step wrong, and you disappear. The carpenter in me clocked details, date in the footer, page numbers, blank lines waiting for names, and the tidy box where a notary would later prove I had agreed to vanish. I took photos with my old phone, one per page, then close-ups of phrases that changed a life in 6 words. Consent to placement, durable power, guardianship recommendation. I made sure to capture the sticky note with its giddy little schedule. Then I returned every sheet to the order I'd found it, slid the folder back under the tote, nudged the tote so its strap hung as it had before. When you've repaired enough broken cabinets, you learn not to leave bright fingerprints. On the patio, the wind had shifted east, and with it came the mineral scent of low tide. I stood there a minute and let my pulse find a slower gear. The plan was simple enough to remember. Don't sign anything, don't confront yet, document everything. A good joint is stronger than the wood around it because it gives pressure somewhere to go. My temper needed a mortise of its own. I called Gordon from the deck while the ocean sewed gray thread onto gray cloth. He answered on the second ring, voice loose and gravelly, the way retired cops sound when they trade a badge for a garden. I told him what I'd seen. He said, "Don't sign a thing." "Then you keep your deed in the house?" I told him where. He cursed softly and said he'd swing by my place in Portland, check the lock on the file cabinet, and pull a certified copy from the county if he had to. "Text me the legal description off your mortgage," he added, because he is the sort of friend who knows which page will save you. I sent photos while we were still on the phone. "Good," he said. "Now be polite." Predators count on noise. Quiet men frighten them. They came back sandy and bright, full of small victories. Shells, a kite that almost flew, a wet dog they wanted to adopt. I flipped grilled cheese and laid chips in a bowl. The normalness was almost convincing. After lunch, while Lucas wrestled a trash bag and the kids argued about a board game, Harper brought a neat sheaf of papers to the counter with the air of a nurse drawing a curtain. "Just a couple of health insurance forms," she said. "It'll make things easier." I wiped my hands on a towel and said, "I'll have the union lawyer give them a look." Her smile stayed, but it tightened. Lucas, trying to be the bridge he isn't, said, "It's standard, Dad." "Standards deserve reading," I said, and turned to rinse a plate. Words fell into their positions like studs into a layout. Easier meant control. Later meant now. Health insurance meant what the folder had already told me it meant. Vivian breezed in with a scented candle and stood as if she might like to witness anything that declared itself official. I poured coffee and offered her a cup. She said she shouldn't, but she did. All afternoon I practiced ordinary. I showed Owen how to plane a strip of driftwood without tearing the grain. I praised Avery's tower of stones and taught her the trick of finding balance by lowering your eyes instead of raising your chin. Inside, the folder sat quiet beneath its tote, patient the way a nail waits for a hammer. Toward evening, the wind picked up, and with it the sense that something had changed its mind. I stepped onto the deck and felt it. An onshore breeze swung inland without warning, cool against the sweat at my ribs. A wind shift tells a roofer when to tie down tarps or pack up before a sheet becomes a sail. In my chest, the same warning snapped. I wrote the phrase in my pocket notebook, wind shift, under the 3 words from the morning, then added Friday in block letters and circled it twice. On the next line, I wrote property manager, witness, and underlined the question mark until it looked like a scar. When the sun slid into its evening position, Harper tried again, a softer pitch, a hand on the papers as if to bless them. I thanked her for organizing the week and said we could deal with paperwork after due diligence. Polite words, straight spine. She nodded as if I were being difficult on principle. Lucas stared at his phone like it might tell him which parent he belonged to. The kids built a blanket fort and called it a ship. I told them ships need ballast and handed them the heavy throw pillow. Everybody laughed, and in the laughter I felt my resolve set like glue. That night, when the house finally exhaled, I took out my notebook and wrote the timeline down to the minute. The sticky note's instruction read like a promise. Sign Friday, promises work both ways. Mine was this: I would not be hurried, I would not be tricked. Let the wind shift, let them count on my silence. There are silences that surrender and silences that sharpen. I meant to keep the kind that could cut. The morning after the wind changed, I made myself move slower than habit. Slowness buys time. Time lets pressure find a harmless exit. I told Owen we'd go into town for wooden clothespins to build a sailboat, and he bounced into his shoes before anyone could volunteer to supervise me instead. The sky was a low lid, the air tasted of pennies. We walked past tourist windows full of driftwood hearts and mugs with anchors, and I kept my mind on what could be done before Friday arrived wearing a smile. At the post office, I bought a padded envelope and a small roll of tape. I wrote Gordon's name in block letters and slid a spare house key inside with a note. File cabinet in the den, bottom drawer, manila folder labeled mortgage and deed, combination for the lockbox, and the county reference numbers. Owen tugged my sleeve to show me a postcard with a dog and sunglasses. I bought it for him and let him choose the stamp. The clerk weighed my envelope and set it on a cart with the same indifference that keeps airplanes in the air. It comforted me to know the key was leaving my pocket. On the walk back, we bought clothespins, a dowel, and a thin sheet of balsa. Back at the house, I told Owen the trick to sales. They don't shove, they catch and redirect. We glued the hull while he narrated pirate legends he was inventing in real time. Avery perched on a stool and asked if boats get scared of waves. Only when the captain does, I said, which earned me a skeptical look I respected. While glue set under a coffee mug for weight, I stepped onto the deck and texted Gordon the tracking number, then called. Wind hissed in the line. He answered like he'd been waiting. I told him the envelope was on its way, reminded him where the cabinet sat, asked him to check the lock for scratches and the floor for splinters. If the deed's gone, I'll grab a certified copy from the county, he said. Text me the legal description anyway. Already sent, I said. Good, he replied. And Ethan? Don't sign a thing. Next, I thumbed through old contacts until I found Martha, a nurse who can smell a cut corner the way a carpenter smells wet rot. I asked what she knew of Dr. Malcolm Reese, complaints, board inquiries, anything that would tell me whether his evaluation meant caution or convenience. I'll check, she said. Give me a few hours. I thanked her and set the phone face down. The fan ticked. The sea dragged and returned. Harper announced a seafood lunch as if she were catering a retreat. She had already handled the payment through the rental app, her word. I nodded, then wrote in my pocket notebook, crab boil, app charge, estimate $120 paid via my card on file. When money moves without permission, it leaves a film on the tongue. I rinsed mine with water and went to show Avery how to balance stones by lowering your gaze until the stack's waver turns honest. My phone buzzed. Gordon, he was at my house. Lock's been jimmied, he said. Neat job, but there's brass dust in the jam. Deeds missing. The words landed like a nail through pine. "I'm at the county now," he added. "I'll pull a certified copy and keep it." I thanked him while the world slid an inch sideways and then righted. A minute later, a photo hit my screen, the clerk's receipt, the seal raised like a thumbprint you could feel. Another buzz, Martha. "Not formal discipline," she said, "but Reese has been looked at. 2 families complained his capacity reports leaned suspiciously fast toward guardianship, nothing proven." She paused. "Be careful." People dress this up as compassion, I told her I would. Between messages, normal life kept performing its pageant. Owen's boat needed sanding, Avery's tower fell, and she didn't cry. Lucas folded napkins with the concentration of a man pretending he had a smaller problem to solve. Harper moved through the kitchen with clean efficiency, a hand on every process. Then the first twist of the day, a neighbor sent me a link on Nextdoor. "Is this you?" A 30-second clip showed me frowning at a garbage truck blocking a curb ramp. The caption called me forgetful and volatile. The audio was clipped to make my voice sound sharp. I remembered the morning. I had asked the crew to leave space for Mrs. Nguyen's wheelchair. I took screenshots of the post, the timestamp, the account with a profile picture of a generic shoreline rendered in the same cool palette Harper liked for social posts. I saved the URL and wrote in the notebook, "Narrative laundering." I created a folder on my phone, Friday, and fed it everything. The POA pages, close-ups of consent to placement, the sticky note that chirped, "Sign Friday," Gordon's photo of the county receipt, the Nextdoor screenshots, Martha's text, a photo of the tote as I'd found it so no one could claim I'd mislaid their papers. I named the files with dates and times. Evidence is a spine. Without it, the body of a story slumps. To understand the witness piece, I called the property manager and asked, in the curious tone tourists use, what the process would be if someone wanted a staffer to notarize or witness paperwork for a guest. "We don't notarize," she said, professional and brisk. "If guests ask staff to witness, we require ID for everyone present and a note in the log." "Makes sense," I said. "Thanks for keeping people safe." She sounded pleased to be affirmed, and I hung up knowing at least one shortcut would have to be taken in daylight. Harper circled back in late afternoon, softer this time, papers squared on the counter like a promise. "Just trying to make things easier," she said. "We can knock this out." "I'll let the union lawyer review first," I answered. Lucas looked between us as if the room were slowly becoming bilingual. "It's standard, Dad," he tried again. "Standards deserve reading," I said, and turned to help Owen trim the sail. We finished the boat at dusk. Owen launched it in a shallow pan by the sink and blew until it nosed forward. Triumphant. Avery asked if waves in a bowl count as real waves. "They count if you stand captain," I told her. Harper wiped the counter in a brisk rectangle and announced dinner. I salted the corn and listened to the ocean find its night voice. When the house settled, I opened my notebook and wrote a timeline down to minutes. Post office 9:42, call with Gordon 10:08, call with Martha 10:27, app charge 12:15, Nextdoor link 2:03, property manager 3:11, Harper pitch 4:47. Under the list, I drew a box and wrote Friday in the center, then scored 2 diagonal lines across it like braceboards. Below that, silence can surrender or sharpen. Choose the latter. I slid the notebook under my pillow on the couch the way a younger man might slide a hand under a loved one's shoulder. The fan ticked. Somewhere a hinge sighed. Pressure had a path now, a structure to run along, and I had what I needed to walk into tomorrow without raising my voice. A spine of facts, a few allies, and the steadiness that comes from knowing where the studs are behind the wall. By late afternoon, the light went honey thick and the wind dropped to a caution. I set the table on the porch with the ceremony of a man laying out tools. My pocket notebook, my phone face down but awake, a glass of water to keep hands honest. Haystack Rock sat in fog like a judge in chambers. Inside, the TV murmured cartoons to keep the kids elsewhere. I invited the adults out where the air had room for truth. I didn't raise my voice. I named the purpose: to read aloud what had been placed in front of me under other names. The flag on the railing clicked against its clip. I turned my phone upright and opened the first photo I'd taken. The cover sheet as plain as lumber-grade stamps. Durable power of attorney, principal, Ethan Callum. Agent, Lucas Callum. I pinched the screen to enlarge the lines that change lives quietly. Manage bank accounts, real property at Northeast Alberta Street, consent to placement in long-term care. I showed them the corner with the sticky note as if it were part of a blueprint. Sign Friday. Witness, Vivian plus property manager. The handwriting leaned forward, eager. I kept my voice flat enough to measure. Words should not have to shout to be heard. I slid to the clause that used capacity like a trapdoor, upon recommendation of a licensed physician, and to the tidy box where a notary would later stamp a fiction as fact. Harper's smile hung for a beat and then repositioned itself as helpfulness. "They're just health insurance forms, Ethan," she said, hitting the word just as if it were a softener. "This makes everything easier for you." Vivian nodded with the seriousness of a volunteer usher. Lucas looked at me and then away, his jaw working like a man tasting two truths at once. The porch boards kept still beneath our weight. I opened the email preview I'd screenshotted, the one that had frozen me by the sink. Capacity report, durable power, guardianship recommendation. The sender line read Dr. Malcolm Reese. I did not editorialize. I let the phrase guardianship sit under the light. I said only that it is a word for children or the incapacitated, and that I am neither. "We can tidy paperwork without erasing the person the paperwork belongs to," I added, something like sawdust in my tone. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Harper reached for the stack she'd been carrying around the way people carry towels near a pool, always ready to mop. "Ethan, this is about avoiding hassle later," she said, and turned to Lucas. "Tell him it's standard." Lucas swallowed. "It's standard, Dad." I nodded once. "Standards deserve reading," I said. It came out even, almost kind. A joint is strongest when the pressure is distributed. I moved to the next piece, factual as a ledger, a photo Gordon had sent of my den cabinet, brass dust at the latch and crescent scars where a pick had flirted with failure. Next, the county clerk's receipt for a certified copy of my deed, the raised seal clear as a thumbprint. I didn't accuse, I didn't have to. Evidence holds its own shape when you let it. Harper blinked, recalculating. Vivian sat straighter, then lifted her chin a half-inch as if posture could testify. The ocean thudded its steady syllables against rock. I advanced to the next-door post, a thin slice of me trimmed to look sharp and unstable, time-stamped, captioned in a voice polished for marketing. I showed the profile's generic shoreline photo and let the metadata note its palette. "Narrative laundering," I said. "You paint a picture first so the frame seems obvious." Color left Lucas's face and then returned in two pale flags. He looked from my phone to the master bedroom window behind us, to the couch visible through the slider where my blanket lay folded because I had made it. "He is my son. He has my hands." He saw, I think, the line from convenience to control drawn without squeak or fuss. He rubbed his forehead with the heel of his palm, a small admission that something inside had slipped. I asked one question I had been saving, not to wound, but to set a level. "If respect were the measure," I said, "why is Vivian in the master and I on the couch?" For a heartbeat, the porch held its breath. Harper didn't flinch. "Because you're the one who came later in our lives," she said, as if that settled math. The sentence fell like a plumb bob and found the lowest point available. I let the quiet spread so each of us could hear how it sounded. The flag tapped metal. The sun drifted lower until the phone screen caught it, and the word guardianship glowed the way gold leaf does on a church letter. I closed the photo and laid the phone down. "I'm not signing tonight," I said. "Union Counsel will read every word. Every word will be read aloud. If there is more pressure by Friday, we'll take this to people whose job is to sort pressure from fraud." Harper's fingers pressed the edge of her papers until the stack was weapon straight. "You're making trouble where there isn't any," she said, quieter now. Vivian looked past me to the horizon, as if the sea might draft a different ending. Lucas didn't speak. He didn't defend me either. He simply failed to join the prosecution, which for the first time that week felt like something. I gathered my notebook and made one last note. Porch hearing, evidence presented, no signatures, and the act of writing steadied me. My name is a simple enough word to carry. It will not be loaned to anything that erases it. Behind us, the house ticked and settled. Inside, a cartoon laughed on cue. Out past the rail, the rock kept its counsel and the tide climbed in slow, inevitable inches. I stood, nodded once to each of them as if adjourning court, and let the evening close around the decision like a dovetail fit dry. Tomorrow would bring its own tests. Tonight I had asked the right questions out loud and left them ringing long enough for the answers to show themselves. If you're still watching and felt that turning point, comment number 1, truth is about to cost us and free us. The house smelled of salt and static. The porch hearing had left the air splintered, thin as veneer. I sat at the kitchen table under the low hum of a single light, the papers gone but their shadows still arranged in piles. Harper stood by the window, one hand gripping her phone like a leash. Lucas hovered near the doorway, neither entering nor leaving. She spoke first. "If you keep pushing," she said, "I'll have to show them what your son's been hiding." Her tone was soft, the kind of softness that cuts deeper than shouting. I told her to be plain. She opened a folder in her email and turned the screen so I could see. Subject line, bid adjustments, material overages. Threaded beneath it were exchanges between Lucas and a contractor named Tyler. Invoices doubled for asphalt that never touched the road. The attachments were spreadsheets, clean columns, numbers with just enough roundness to pass a lazy audit. "If you push this, I'll go to the DA," she said. For a moment I couldn't hear the ocean. The only sound was my own pulse thudding behind my teeth. Lucas's breath stuttered. "It's not, Dad. It's not what it looks like." He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture of a man trying to find the edge of his own guilt. I looked at him, not her. "Then tell me what it is." He slumped into the chair across from me. "Tyler said everyone inflates bids a little. Said it keeps the lights on. I signed off on a few invoices, nothing big. It's just the game." His voice cracked on game. I leaned forward. "The game where they use your mistake to take my house?" "That game?" He dropped his gaze. "I didn't know she—" "You didn't ask," I said. It wasn't anger. It was a carpenter's assessment, measuring, confirming, marking the point of failure. Harper crossed her arms. "You think you can lecture about ethics while living off a pension the union negotiated for men you barely remember?" I turned to her. "The difference is my work still stands. The roofs I built don't leak. Can you say that about the people you build stories around?" She smiled thinly. "You always think you're the noble one." "This is just paperwork, Ethan. Sign it and nobody gets hurt." There it was, the choice. Sign or watch my son's life collapse under his own mistake. My hand trembled once before I flattened it on the table. "If I sign, I give you power to finish what you started. If I don't, we face what we've done. I'll take the second." Lucas looked up, startled. "Dad, she'll go to the DA?" "Then we'll meet her there," I said. Harper laughed, small and brittle. "You destroy your own son to prove a point?" "No," I said. "I'll save him by stopping the lie that's eating him." I opened my phone, scrolled to a set of photos Gordon had sent earlier. Harper and a man I didn't recognize at first. Hands too familiar around each other. His name surfaced in my memory from a contract logo. Wesley Crane, owner of a marketing agency, tied to half the fake invoices in Lucas's project. A man who turned asphalt into digital media spend. Money washed through a crypto funnel so clean it gleamed. "You want to talk about the DA?" I said quietly. "Maybe start with Wesley Crane. He's the one your partner Tyler routes payments through. You've been helping him brand the same projects Lucas signed for." V-color drained from her face. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not yet," I said, "but Gordon's tracing the accounts. Every dollar leaves a nailhead somewhere." Vivian, who'd been silent until now, shifted on the couch. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. For the first time, she didn't come to her daughter's rescue. Lucas turned toward Harper, confusion flickering into anger. "You used my job?" "Don't be naive," Harper snapped. "You used it first." That was when it broke. The illusion of family, of shared purpose, of tidy paperwork for convenience. The house filled with the sound of breathing that didn't synchronize. I stood, Tomorrow morning, we drive to the district attorney's office in Astoria. We tell them everything, the invoices, the threats, the forgery. We cooperate. We pay what's owed, and we stop hiding. Harper's eyes narrowed. You think confession fixes rot? It doesn't fix it, I said. It keeps it from spreading. Lucas pushed back his chair so hard it scraped. I can't. Dad, my job. I put a hand on his shoulder. We fix this by telling the truth. He didn't answer right away, but when he finally did, it was a whisper. Okay. I looked at Harper. If you try to move money tonight, if you touch my accounts, if another fake post appears, Gordon sends the file to the DA before sunrise. I showed her my phone, the folder labeled Friday, full of photos, timestamps, and receipts. Everything's dated. Everything's backed up. Her expression flickered between fury and fear, then landed on a blank space I'd never seen before. You'll regret this, she said. Probably, I replied, but regret is lighter than chains. I turned to Lucas. Pack an overnight bag. We leave at 6. After they disappeared down the hall, I cleaned the table, wiped away fingerprints, gathered the scattered pages, slid them into the evidence folder. I checked each photo twice. In the notebook, I wrote 3 words: confession, restitution, cooperation. Then below them, a line from habit and trade. Always playing against the grain if you want the board straight. It'll bite, but it won't bend. Outside, the tide was rising again, patient and unstoppable. I set my alarm for dawn and left the light burning, a small, stubborn act of ownership in a house that no longer felt like mine. The wind shifted once more, and for the first time in weeks, it was blowing inland. We left before the sun had worked up the nerve to rise. The road empty except for logging trucks and our headlights laid down like parallel rules. US 101 unwound ahead of us, wet and dark, shoulders shining where fog had licked them. Lucas rode silent, hands locked between his knees, the kind of posture a man takes when he's trying to keep all his parts from rattling loose. I drove the way I frame, steady, eyes on level, while the ocean ran alongside like a witness who doesn't embellish. In the console, my pocket notebook lay open on 3 words I had written like commandments: confession, restitution, cooperation. Astoria greeted us with gulls and a tide that looked like hammered pewter. The DA's building was square and tired, a place where paper takes the starch out of people who think they're bigger than paper. We passed through a metal detector that beeped for my belt buckle and then didn't. An investigator with the calm of a school librarian led us to a windowless room, put down a recorder, and waited without hurry. I spoke first because fathers go first. I said we had material to surrender and a statement to make. Lucas cleared his throat and nodded, small, like a man agreeing to board a boat in rough weather. He started at the beginning. He could see the bid adjustments, Tyler's emails, the everybody does it that becomes a lullaby when you work too long without a clock. He didn't dress it up. He named invoices, dates, percentages. I watched him choose accurate words over flattering ones, and it felt like watching a beam find its bearing after a bad lift. The investigator asked questions the way carpenters measure twice, same line, different angle. When Lucas finished, he signed a statement with a pen that clicked 3 times before it worked. The investigator slid across a sheet about repayment and cooperation. Lucas read it, breathing like a man learning how again, and signed a second time. My turn. I pulled the phone, opened the folder labeled Friday, and set it beside the recorder so the screen light could do some of the talking. Photos of the POA pages, close-ups of consent to placement, and real property at NE Alberta Street. A shot of the sticky note chirping "Sign Friday." Witness Vivian plus property manager. Screens of the email preview from Dr. Malcolm Reese with capacity report, durable power, guardianship recommendation. The brass dust Gordon had photographed at my file cabinet in Portland, and the county receipt with a raised seal like a braille warning. The next door clip with its clipped audio and a caption written in the kind of friendly font that tries to tuck a knife up its sleeve. The investigator didn't say much. He took notes, time-stamped our timestamps, and asked for copies. I airdropped what I could, forwarded what I couldn't, and wrote my own statement about pressure, mislabeling, and the word later used like a crowbar. At the end, he asked if there was any risk of me signing under duress before the week ended. "Not anymore," I said. He looked at Lucas. "And you?" Lucas met his eyes and said he understood the line we were drawing. The investigator nodded once, the ceremony complete, then gave us case numbers and a list of next steps that sounded like homework you do if you want to pass a class you should never have taken. In the parking lot, the wind came off the river knife clean. We stood a minute without speaking, then I called the property manager at the rental. I thanked her for running a tight ship and repeated what she'd told me yesterday about witnesses and logs, asked that any unusual requests be written down with full names and times. She promised to brief her team. Control loves shadows. A good logbook is sunlight. Back at the house, events had rearranged themselves without us. Vivian's perfume lingered in the hall, but her suitcase was gone. The master bed lay smooth as a brochure. On the counter, a note in her round hand said she needed time with a friend in Seaside. It read like conscience written in cursive. A text from Harper waited for me. A string of fire emojis without the emojis, a promise to make this public. I took screenshots like I had all week, time, date, number, then filed them where they could do good instead of harm. The day needed a hinge. I made one. I invited Harper to meet at a cafe near the beach to try a signing, told her we could revisit the forms if an independent notary oversaw the process. She replied too quickly, the way a person does when the plan fits into a shoulder holster. Before leaving, I called the notary, a volunteer I knew from a church clinic for older folks, explained that I wanted the rules followed letter for letter, and asked if we could record with consent. She said yes, and that she would ask the kind of dry questions people can't lie to without cracking their masks. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and sea damp. I sat by the window where light lands honest. The notary arrived first, then Harper with a manila envelope and a smile ironed flat. We exchanged IDs. I asked if we could record. The notary repeated the question and Harper said fine in a tone that meant anything but. The notary's pen clicked. "Source of the capacity evaluation?" she asked, as neutral as a form. Harper's eyes flicked to me, then back. "Dr. Reese," she answered. "And the timing?" He'll prepare it again." Like before, the notary looked up. "Without Mr. Callum's consent?" Harper exhaled through her nose. "We don't need him to agree to an evaluation." Silence took the next seat. The notary wrote something on her pad she did not read aloud. I could hear the ocean working the sand as if sanding a board. We stopped there. The notary refused to witness anything and noted as much. Harper gathered her envelope too fast, left a damp thumbprint on the top sheet. She left without meeting my eyes. I thanked the notary, saved the recording twice, and sent both audio and a brief write-up to the investigator's secure upload that he'd texted me on our way out earlier. The subject line was dull on purpose, supplemental, potential undue influence at attempted signing. Driving back to Cannon Beach, Lucas watched the sea. "I feel emptied," he said finally, just that one sentence, as if using more would spend what he had left. Emptied wasn't bad. You can rebuild on empty. It's rot that spreads. At the house, I counted my proofs like a man counting bolts. The file was thicker, the line straighter. I wrote in my notebook, confession filed, trap recorded, next, rebuild. Outside, the surf went from pewter to steel and kept hitting the shore with the patience I have always trusted more than luck. I lay down on the couch I had not chosen and let the cold in. It was a clarifying cold, the kind that tells you steel is straight because it rings when you tap it. 2, and then 3 weeks folded over each other like gray pages, the Oregon sky a steady sheet of drizzle that polished everything to a low shine. The house smelled of wet cedar and coffee. I kept my bench swept, my notebook open, and my life to sequences that would hold underweight. After the trip to Astoria, letters arrived in neat envelopes, a notice from the DA outlining probation, and a restitution schedule for Lucas, a list of conditions that read like rails set to keep a train from climbing the embankment again. He sold his work truck and the little side shop he loved, handed me the bill of sale with a shrug that looked like humility learning to speak. He took a job as a roadway engineer for a firm that pays slower and cleaner. "I sleep through the night now," he said once, and that one sentence carried more proof than any affidavit. I turned toward stewardship, a word that feels like a tool in the hand. First, the doors. I had the locks replaced, checked the jambs for bruises, and set a shim where the frame had warped and forgotten it was supposed to be straight. I set fraud alerts with the credit bureaus and froze my file so anyone who wanted me would have to knock in daylight. New pins, then two-factor sign-in. Everywhere I keep a name and a balance. With my attorney, I redrew the documents that people like to hide inside the word later. A will, a healthcare directive that says what I mean, and a springing power of attorney that wakes only if two independent physicians, not one, agree on a fact about me I cannot dispute. I named Gordon Hayes my backup agent and wrote Harper's name in the only place that made sense. Not authorized. I copied the Friday file, photos, recordings, receipts, onto an encrypted USB and sealed a paper set with red string. Gordon slid both into his safe with the casual gravity men like us bring to things that matter. Silence gathers where lies have been hauled out. I pried up the last planks where rumor nested. With my lawyer's help, I sent the platform a takedown request for the Nextdoor smear, requested metadata and audit logs, and filed a letter that said cease and desist without shouting. The post fell, then reappeared labeled disputed, and then fell for good. The space it left was not triumph. It was cleanliness, like wiping mud off a threshold. On Wednesdays, I drove to the church hall where they run workshops for older folks and anyone traveling with them. I stood at the front with my carpenter's pencil and wrote 4 rules on a whiteboard. Read aloud. Photograph everything. Log names and times. Delay the appointment. I told the story in the plain voice that respects the listener. I said convenience is not a virtue, it is a lever. I said a good signature is like a good joint, tight because the parts were carved to meet, not because someone sat on the clamp. People nodded in that way a room nods when a notch in the world has been explained. At home, the house came back around me like a jacket that had been tailored. On Fridays, the kids arrived with backpacks loud with zippers. We made hot chocolate too sweet, cut sails for a new balsa boat, planed edges until the shavings curled like little commas. I taught Owen to find center with his eye, not his chin. I showed Avery how to weigh a tower with her breath. The attic room held them at night, small and fierce, and the rest of the house remembered what warmth sounds like when it's not a performance. I mounted a small sign in my shop at eye level, respect is not optional, and below it a list of procedures written in the same hand I use for cut lists. Who pays what goes on paper and into the jar by the door. Sleeping arrangements start with elders and work down. Documents are signed only with a lawyer or an independent notary present. Every word is read out loud. Lucas, to his credit, didn't test the lines. He arrived with groceries and receipts, handed me a sheet that showed his payments to the court, and asked whether I needed a new smoke detector for the hall. We spoke less about guilt and more about habit, which is the only apology you can prove. The world beyond our fence kept moving. I received a letter from the medical board that used the phrase, under review, in relation to Dr. Malcolm Reese, a short paragraph that carried the quiet of a door closing somewhere down the hallway. The investigator emailed a bland update that the financial probe had widened around Wesley Crane. Bland is how truth travels when it means to arrive. Harper went quiet in public and narrower in private. My attorney resent a note that any contact about money or signatures must pass through him. Nothing came. Absence can be a form of respect when it's enforced. Inside me, the cold from the coast remained but rebranded itself as clarity. Steel is truest when it rings. I could hear that note when I tapped my days. I felt the bruise of that first night on the couch, the way you feel old weather in your knuckles, remembered but not in charge. Order became the therapy I could afford. Each night I walked the house and checked stove, locks, lights, looked once at my accounts, and closed the lid. Wrote one line in the notebook before bed. Today I did not sign out of fear and slept under the ordinary mercy of small routines done well. A slim letter came with a court seal, a brief hearing date for Lucas, a procedural stop on the road we had chosen. I ironed my old suit because a man should meet consequence with a pressed line. I set our alarm for earlier than it had to be and packed the folder even though everything in it now lived in wider hands. In the shop, I ran a plane across a stubborn board just once, the grain lifting, then laying down obedient, and I thought about what revenge means to men who prefer wood straight and roofs dry. It is not spectacle. It is refusal to bend where bending would break you. It is standing long enough in your exact life that the people who tried to shrink it must lower their eyes to pass. Morning put a dull edge on the city, the kind that makes every sound carry farther than it should. I wore the old suit I had pressed the night before and folded the Friday folder under my arm out of habit more than need. The courthouse smelled like wet paper and disinfectant. A clerk's rubber stamp thudded every few seconds like a slow heart. Lucas walked beside me without touching the walls, his tie slightly off-center, the way a man declares he's not hiding anymore. In the courtroom, fluorescent light flattened the corners of everything. The judge looked over wire frames and called the case in a voice that had learned how to be firm without decoration. The district attorney summarized the agreement we had come to in Astoria: probation, a restitution schedule, mandatory ethics training, cooperation with the broader investigation. The words stacked neatly. When asked if he understood, Lucas spoke into the microphone, hands steady on the table. "Yes, Your Honor." The sentence was small, but it had a spine. The judge warned him that any breach would turn the suspended term into the real kind. Lucas said, "I understand." I marked the sound of it, how understanding can be a hinge when you let it turn. I did not need to speak. My presence was a ledger entry, the man who had insisted on calling this what it was. When the gavel tapped once, the room exhaled. Outside, the wind off the river was sharp enough to polish thought. We stood on the wide steps with the view of gray water and steel bridge, and the space between us felt earned rather than fragile. Lucas looked at his hands like they belonged to him again. "I'll pay it off," he said, "with my own hands." I nodded and put one palm on his shoulder. The gesture said the rest. The prosecutor's office emailed afterward. Administrative phrasing with teeth inside it. A case number now tracked attempted elder financial exploitation and a conspiracy to forge or coerce documents. A preservation letter went to a social platform about the doctored clip. A no-contact order covered money and signatures. Another message noted subpoenas on media spend accounts connected to Wesley Crane and shells that smelled like detergent more than business. The medical board stamped "received" on my complaint about Dr. Malcolm Reese and set a date for an internal hearing. None of it was fireworks. Real accountability rarely is. It moves in memos and calendars and the sound of printers working late. By afternoon, I was back in my house where light falls from the south and lands kindly on old wood. A white envelope lay under the mail slot with my name written in a careful hand. Vivian's letter was 3 paragraphs without defense. She said she had confused shielding her daughter with loving her daughter. She said she was sorry for the master bedroom, for the way a mother can become a partner in someone else's ambition. She did not ask to be absolved. I wrote back that there was a chair at my table if she walked in under her own name and left power at the door. Boundaries are both gift and fence. I aimed to make this one a gate. That evening, Lucas came by with subs wrapped in paper that bled vinegar. Owen arrived in a rush of questions about bridges and boats. Avery hung a crayon drawing of Haystack Rock on the fridge with a magnet the shape of Oregon. We ate without speeches. The sign in my shop, "Respect is not optional," caught the light from the kitchen and read itself aloud to anyone who needed to hear it. After dishes, I took them out to the bench and we said the procedures again the way you practice fire drill. Who pays writes it down. Elders choose rooms first. Signatures happen only with counsel or an independent notary. Every clause is read out loud. "Out loud," Owen repeated, testing the weight of it. Avery nodded solemnly and asked if out loud counted when you whisper carefully. I told her careful whispering is where a lot of bad deals start. We remade the house by doing nothing dramatic. The attic stayed the kids' kingdom, strings of warm bulbs and a window that faces morning. My room shifted to the ground floor with a view of my cedar and the small square of sky I've always trusted, and the couch returned to being furniture instead of a verdict. I tucked the blanket into a trunk and closed the lid. The gesture wasn't victory, it was housekeeping. On Saturday, we took a photograph against the brick wall in the shop, the thicks and thins of red showing years of dust and work. Lucas on my right, Owen and Avery leaning into center, a T-square hanging behind us like a quiet emblem. No one asked where Harper was. We are what we stand next to and what we refuse to stand for. The picture showed both. I slid a print into a frame and set it by the T-square so drawn lines and drawn people could share the same shelf. The letters kept moving through their routes. The platform flagged the old clip as disputed and then removed it. An audit log came stamped and boring, which is the honor language bureaucracies speak to those they finally treat as citizens. The DA's investigator acknowledged receipt of the cafe recording where Harper said the quiet part about evaluations without consent. The notary's note had already become part of the file. The medical board sent a second email, short, neutral, relentless. If justice has a scent, it is unscented soap. That night, the house was all familiar sounds, a dryer turning, a stair settling, Jordan's jazz station on low like a heartbeat in the next room. I went to the shop and ran a hand over the bench until splinters confessed themselves. In my notebook, I wrote the day's single line. I read every word and kept my name. I slid the book closed and stood there long enough to hear what the quiet had to say. It said nothing dramatic. It said, keep sequence. It said, tomorrow you will check the locks, boil water for coffee, and measure twice before naming anything. If revenge needed a pose, I would choose this one, standing long enough in a room I paid for in a life I built, that the people who tried to fold me smaller have to round their shoulders to pass. Being straight is not a flex, it is a function. Wood remembers the pressure that bent it and the plane that brought it back, so do men. The court's fluorescent light had shown as much, and now the soft light over my kitchen sink agreed. I checked the alarm for morning, matched my shoes by the mat, and set the Friday folder back in the cabinet where it belonged, no longer a shield, just a record of how we chose to remain ourselves. Upstairs, the kids laughed at something I could not hear, and the sound fell down the stairwell like good weather. I turned off the lamp and let the house hold me the way a straight frame holds a roof, without pride, without apology, just because it was built that way. On Sunday, the light came in clean, the way it does after a week of rain has rinsed the air. I opened the shop before the kettle had finished its small complaint and clamped a bowed plank to the bench. The first pass with the plane skittered. The second sang. Shavings curled off like pale ribbons and fell at my boots. There is a sound you learn to trust. The ring of steel doing what it was made to do. The hush of a board laying down straight after resisting you for a while. I worked with slow strokes, checked with the T-square, and thought about how a life returns to shape not in one grand cut but in a sequence of true ones. I've put the blanket from the couch away, folded it by hand, corners kissing, slid it into the cedar trunk that smells like old holidays. My room is on the ground floor, sunlight cupping the sill by 10, a view of the small square of sky I claim each morning. The attic is loud again with weekend feet. The kids have made their flag from a torn pillowcase and 2 clothespins. On the shop wall, the family picture sits under the T-square. 3 faces and a tool that guarantees straight lines. We are not performing for the world anymore. We are recording what we mean to be. What remains is not drama. I kept my name. I kept the deed to the N.E. Alberta house and the authority to sign for my own body if anyone in a white coat mistakes convenience for care. The new documents are boring and perfect, a springing power that wakes only if 2 independent physicians agree, a health directive that names Gordon as my backup when the day comes I cannot choose lunch. The attorney shook my hand as if I'd just installed a ridge beam. "This will hold," he said. He was right. The part I let go was the habit of signing because someone promised a line would be shorter if I did. I have retired from being hurried. In the shop, I've posted 5 rules on a sheet of plywood sanded smooth enough to accept a pencil point. Read aloud, photograph, log names and time, delay the appointment, ask for whom. They aren't clever, they are sufficient. We practice them without ceremony. When we buy a phone plan for Lucas, we read the fine print like we are measuring before cutting. When Owen signs a permission slip, he reads the paragraph first and then says, solemn as a judge, "For whom does this help?" Avery writes dates on the whiteboard and circles them so no one has to pretend later came as a surprise. The world beyond our kitchen keeps its calendar. The medical board sent an email with a line that said Dr. Reese will be heard on a date that looks like any other until you understand why it isn't. The DA's office forwarded a notice that the financial probe into Wesley Crane has widened, a sentence with no music that still sounds like a door unlatching. I haven't gone looking for news about Harper. My lawyer keeps the line narrow. Any message about money or signatures routes through him and then either ends there or enters the record where it belongs. A good fence makes for quiet yards. I measure mine in inches and gratitude. Lucas came by this week with the first stack of receipts for restitution, staples crooked in a way that makes a man look young again. He taped the schedule inside his closet and said, "I'll keep paying." Then he changed the hardwired smoke detector that had been chirping at a spiteful hour and held the ladder while I hung the framed rules beside the bench. His face has stopped wearing the expression of a person waiting to be called out. He returns calls from the new job on the first ring. He sleeps. The proof is not in what he says, but in how he stands. Owen and Avery finished their balsa boat and burned letters into the hull with a cheap wood pen. Always read out loud. We launched it in a plastic tub in the driveway like a ceremony scaled appropriately for children and their grandfather. The sail filled with a wind someone made by running. The boat moved forward because it had somewhere to hold the pressure. We clapped as if it were a ship rounding the horn. I have been writing to anyone who needs what I needed, neighbors at the church hall, men from the union who think later is a kindness, a woman who pressed my hand and said her daughter is kind until paperwork appears. I tell them the same three things: borrow time by asking for it, gather evidence slowly and store it twice, and find one ally who has no stake in your surrender. You don't have to be younger to defend your life. You have to be stubborn and boring and willing to put names beside dates. If revenge has an Aristotelian form, it is not spectacle. It is the posture of a man who won't shrink to make a thief comfortable. It is the practice of standing long enough in your own square of sunlight that the ones who tried to fold you smaller must bow their heads to pass. Standing straight is not a pose in my trade. It is how walls meet roofs without arguing. When the shop goes quiet, I can hear Cannon Beach in my head, the fan ticking, the surf keeping time, the sentence on the sticky note that thought it could turn a life with a Friday. It didn't. Last Saturday, we drove down in a burst of optimism and parked where the sand is flattest. We rented a porch by the hour at a coffee place that sells blueberry muffins the size of schooners. No master bedroom, no couch verdict, just 4 chairs, sunlight for everyone, and a view of the rock that keeps its counsel. The kids ran lines from tide pools to pretend harbors. Lucas watched them and then watched me, a new quiet on his face that didn't hide anything. Back home, I wrote the day's line in my notebook the way I do now before turning off the light. Today, I read every word and kept my name. Some nights, I add a second. The board was straight. The roof didn't leak. These are the proper prayers of a carpenter. The kettle whistles. The plane's edge is sharp again. I sweep the curls of wood into a bag for kindling and set the straightened board on 2 sawhorses. The house holds. The rules hold. My temper holds where it should. Out the window, a square of sky is as blue as it needs to be. The noise has left, but the structure stays. A frame measured twice, anchored where studs run true, built to carry its share with no drama at all. In the end, what lasts isn't the noise of accusation or the flare of outrage. It's the steady discipline of standing straight when it would be easier to bend. Justice, when it's real, rarely arrives with fireworks. It shows up in quiet rooms, in signatures read aloud, in debts repaid on schedule, in doors that remain locked because boundaries finally mean something. Dignity is a practice. Measure twice, speak once, document everything, and never trade your name for convenience. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequence, it simply makes room for honest work to begin. And resilience isn't bravado, it's the calm habit of doing the next true thing again and again until order replaces chaos. If this story left you thinking about your own lines, what you will sign, what you will refuse, carry them forward. Read every word, ask, for whom? Keep your house, your choices, and your name. Thank you for spending your time here. If a moment resonated, share your thoughts below. We read them and learn from them. Tell us where you're watching from and which lesson you're taking with you. If you'd like more stories about courage, boundaries, and hard-won peace, please like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next.